Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, I bring you something new, something different, something unique, and it comes from a place that's dear to my heart, the tabletop game D&D. So I bring you guys the Eldritch Knight. Now in D&D it's gone through many iterations. Originally it was designed for the fighter class as a way for them to pick up magic, to be a fighter magic user. Later on in 3.5 edition it was changed to where it was a wizard that picked up the fighter capabilities, and then in 5th edition it was changed back to where it was a fighter subclass where they get to pick up magic capabilities. I took what I know of D&D and created a build that I felt fit that kind of play style. So let's go ahead and get into it, and I'll break it down as best I can so you understand it a little bit more. So, High Elf Sorcerer is the class and race choice for this build. Now, High Elves in general in D&D lore and stuff like this, originally were designed to be fighter magic users. And so it kind of fit the theme and the idea. And it also fits into the world of Elder Scrolls with Somerset and them having elven knights and elven guards, that they would be a more of a magic inclined sword fighters. And so I wanted to bring that to this kind of structure. So I created it based on that. Now this is a tank build, so what you see for the stats are adjustable to your own play style and your own playability. It's up to you to decide. Also same with weapons and equipment. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see, I have 64 points in the stamina. This gives me a 30k max stamina with 32k max health, 23k max magicka. My recovery's coming in at 878, 1400 health recovery, and 955 stam recovery. I do have 33k or almost 4k spell damage with 4k weapon damage. I have 24% crit chance on spell and weapon, with the 1600 base spell penetration and physical pen, due to certain things which I can't really get into, but you'll see. So next up we have the spell resist coming at 24,000, physical resist coming in at 23,000. And then scrolling on down, we are running the Thief Mundus Stone. That is the better choice for this, unless you want to use a different setup or something like that. But for this particular way it's built, this is going to be the best Mundus Stone for this build. We do have Minor Resolve at all times, giving us increased spell and physical resist, and we have the Bound Aegis. We are using the Bewitched Sugar Skulls for the max health, max stamina, and max magicka with the health recovery. This will play into the build a little bit better, giving it a little bit more survivability and a little less reliance on a healer to heal them while they're tanking. Now, the way this tank works is it works great in dungeons and overland, and is better as an off tank in trials, not as a main tank. And in some situations you will have to main tank while another tank off tanks, just depending on the situation that arises. Moving on to gear, starting with food and potions. The Tri-Stat food is going to be your better option in this build, unless you're playing more of a stamina based race and you take more stamina based morphs. But even then, going with the Tri-Stat food is still going to be the better option. So, the Bewitched Sugar Skulls is the best food you can get for a tank, because it gives you that max health, max magic, and max stamina, and it gives you that health recovery. And the same thing with Tri-Stat food. When you're not playing dungeons or possibly trials and you're just doing overland stuff, this could be a great way to help you clear overland stuff more efficiently and more effectively. Tripods, of course, going to be the best option for getting resources back when you're tanking. Things like power pots are going to be really good for when you're playing overland and you want to be more DPS and less tank, and you can swap out your skills. When it comes to the gear, you can change this out if you want to, but I like this setup because I feel like it works really good for the idea of a fighter magic user type character. So the first set we have is the Spawn of Mafala. This adds max stamina on the one piece, the two piece, when you deal direct damage or deal damage with a fully charged heavy attack, sorry. You create a web on the under the target for 10 seconds that deals poison damage every second to all enemies within 4 meters, and this effect can occur every 10 seconds, and it scales off the highest weapon or spell damage, in this case your weapon damage. And then moving on to our next set, and this is, a lot of these sets, you gotta understand, play into the build as in the sense of the way it plays. So it's not about like its efficiency or its effectiveness, it's about how it plays and how it utilizes these tools to benefit it in the long run. So the next set we have is Gladiators. Now Gladiators is a widely unused set because it's not as effective as a lot of other sets, but it does have purpose with this build. The 2 and 3 piece adds weapon and spell crit, the 4 piece adds weapon and spell damage, and the 5 piece adds weapon and spell damage to against targets who are under 25% health. So that means any skill, attack, light attack, heavy attack, skill, or ability you use that deals damage or gains the purpose of healing or anything else will benefit from this when you get the enemy below 25% health. So it actually boosts your character and makes your character more powerful for damage output when you're trying to kill the boss or trying to kill that enemy really fast. Alright, moving on to the next set. The next up we're using in the Storm Knights plate set. This drops, so this is a crafted set, by the way. You can craft this in the Dark Brotherhood DLC. The Spawn of Mephala drops in one of the beginner dungeons in the base game, and the Storm Knight drops in Stormhaven. It's an overland set. It's really easy to get, and the 2 and 4 piece give you armor. The 4 piece gives you max health, and then the 5 piece, when you deal or take non-physical damage, you deal shock damage to all enemies within 5 meters of you every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds, and it scales off the higher weapon or spell damage. Again, both these sets are very powerful when used properly, especially when you look at the fact that you're going to give those sets benefit when you get the enemy below 25% health. Those sets are going to boost way up there in damage. Alright, going over traits and enchants. This build uses a little bit of a different trait setup. So starting with the helm, chest, and legs, we are using the tri-stat enchants. This is going to give you more maximized, robust attributes. So more max health, more max magic, and more stamina across the board. On the smaller pieces, we are using, you can use max health. I use max stamina because I want that greater stamina pool to make my hits hit harder, and to make make my abilities hit harder, and to also allow me to have that resource pool so I never have to worry about running out. Alright, now on the bigger pieces, again, we are using 2 invigorating, 1 on the chest and legs, or the legs and helm, sorry. This is going to give you greater recovery for both magicka, stamina, and health. On the chest piece, we are using reinforced for the higher resistance. We don't really need it because we already have an insane amount of resistance, and when you're fully buffed, you have 30k spell with a 28k or 29k physical, almost 29k. So on the smaller pieces, we are using well fitted. Now, well fitted isn't like the ideal option. It's just one I chose for this build because I felt like this is a build that's, you're using magic and sorcery, or magic and blade work. You're going to be very elegant with your fighting, just like the elves are depicted in like Lord of the Rings or whatever. You're going to have an elegant sword fighting skill, and having that ability to be more maneuverable in combat allows you to dodge at a cheaper cost. So you don't have to stand in the way of being hit for certain attacks. You can avoid the really dangerous attacks with the dodge roll, or you can use block with your weapons and one of your skills that's going to help you get a really high block chance. So really, really effective when you look at it in that sense. Again, well fitted on all 4 smaller pieces. This just gives you a really low dodge roll cost. And just to show you, it might not work. It did. Dodge roll cost of 3,036. That's not accurate, actually. That's off. It's more like, I think it's like, well, it might be. But it's usually a lot cheaper, usually around 1700 with the heavy armor. There are some bugs on PTS with attributes and recoveries and damage and crit chance and all that that's not reading accurately. I don't know if they know this, but they should look into it, because if this is the way it is on live, there could be a problem with the coding and the calculations of everything. Don't know. All right. So moving on now to the rest of the equipment. The rings, of course, 2 trirune, as I always do, with weapon damage enchants. The weapon damage is there to amplify not only your ability to do damage, but also gives you access to amplifying your weapon sets and everything else, or your monster sets and your gear sets damage. So it just helps you apply a little bit more pressure on the mobs and the boss and stuff like that when you're tanking. The ring or the necklace we're using infused with 2 tri-stat, or with the prismatic recovery. This gives us magic, health, and stamina recovery. That's why we have such a high health recovery, why we have a decent mag recovery and a decent stamina recovery. And that's without potions. With potions, all 3 jump really high. The 2 trirune rings are going to give you the base stats across the board, very much like these up here do, and it just kind of helps you fill out the character a little bit more with more magicka, stamina, and health. And then the trirunes, of course, give you that greater recovery rate. Moving on to the weapons, we are using dual swords on the front bar. That's going to give you increased spell and weapon damage. But it's also going to give you the Crusher enchant infused with the first one, and then on the offhand, it's a Nirnhond with a prismatic enchant, and this gives you magic damage with health and mag and stamina recovery. So it's a little bit of everything, and it helps out a little bit, not a lot, because this will happen every 5 seconds. If you want to do this infused, it works better, but for my playability, this works fine, so I like it this way. And then on the back bar, we are using an infused bow with a weapon and spell damage enchant. All around, this build is meant to be like an elven knight. Okay, like I said, it just plays the Eldritch Knight theme very well. The idea that you're a soldier and you're going to use ranged until they get close, then you switch to your your 2 swords and you go to town on them. All right, now moving on to skills, and there is a reason why we have so much weapon and spell damage, guys. There's a big reason. It's not just the monster sets, it's also the dots that we're going to be using, because even though we're a tank, helping our group do damage makes things move smoother. There's times where you might have a healer in your group or a DPS in your group that's not really super strong at DPS because they're still learning the game, so having that extra oomph can help your group a lot. Alright, moving on now to skills. So with any build, I usually tell people, unlock as many skills and passives as you possibly can while you're progressing. The reason for this is you never know when you're going to use one skill over another skill, in what situation or anything. So unlocking as many skills as possible really helps you out. But what you're going to use on the bar while you're tanking is what's most important, and that's what we're going to look at today. So starting with the first skill, we have Inner Beast. This is probably by far one of the best taunts in the game. I know a lot of people say, well, the Sword and Shield has a really good taunt, the Ice Staff has a really good taunt, and they do. They have 15-second taunts just like this. The reason I like this is it does deal physical damage, and for 15 seconds you taunt the enemy, but the enemy takes 10% more damage from attacks while this effect persists if they are not a player. So it doesn't apply to a player, but it applies to any enemies you fight in the game. So this increases your group's damage output by another 10%, and it stacks with all other damage increases. So it's a really good one to have. A ranged ally targeting the enemy has a 50% chance to activate the Radiant Synergy, dealing additional magic damage to them, and 3 for 3 seconds, and then more additional damage to them and other nearby enemies. It's a very powerful skill, and it can work to your advantage in many ways, especially when you're playing a dual-wield tank. Moving on to the next one, we have Shattering Prison. This is another great skill. It's from the Dark Magic line, and when you use it, it encases the enemy's feet in crystal and holds them in place for 4 seconds, and then after that 4 seconds it explodes, dealing magic damage to them, and if you don't hit any targets or that doesn't immobilize them, it returns a portion of that magicka. Bosses cannot be used, cannot be encased, only trash can. Alright, next skill we have on our bar is Hardened Ward. Now this is a excellent damage shield. It conjures a globe of dark energy or Daedric energy for protection, granting you a damage shield for you and your pets that absorbs 11,722 damage for 6 seconds, and the damage shield strength is capped at 60% of your max health. As you can see, that's an 11,000 point shield. That's a lot of damage they got to go through, and if your resistances are maxed out, your shield takes a lot less damage, and it means the shield will persist for the duration a lot easier. Alright, moving on to the next skill on our bar, Deadly Cloak. And this is a really good skill for you. One, it gives you major evasion for 10 seconds, reducing your damage taken by 20%. And then on top of that, every 2 seconds, the shrapnel will pulse, dealing extra physical damage to all enemies within 5 meters. This is how you keep your enchants up on your front bar, the Crusher, and you get that the prismatic enchant proccing. If you're using infused on both weapons, they will proc both every 3 seconds. If you've got the way I have it set up, it'll proc one every 3 seconds and the other one every 5. So it will proc at the beginning and at the end, and the other one will proc 3 times. The next skill we have is very important to this build, and that is the Bound Aegis. The Bound Aegis, the reason I say it's very important to this build is because of what it does for you. So let's read the while slotted part. While slotted, you gain 8% max magicka, and gain minor resolve, increasing your physical and spell resist by 2974. This is how you can get away with playing this build without a shield. You have that extra resistance with this. The activation portion, protect yourself with the power of Oblivion, creating a Daedric suit or Daedric mail that increases your block mitigation by 40% for 3 seconds. This is a timed skill, so you have to know encounters really well for this skill to work or function properly. In things like Direfrost Keep, when the boss uses her massive AoE ice ability, you can cast this block and negate pretty much 100% of that damage, because it will block most of it. And it's just incredible. The next thing we have is Rend. Now, Rend is a damage skill, but it deals 42,000 damage, bleed damage over 16 seconds, and heals you for 51% of the damage done. So it doesn't heal you at the right away. It heals you out throughout the process. So that 42k damage is a bleed over time, with this giving you extra healing, incoming healing as you progress. So it's really good. Moving on to the back bar, this is where things get a little interesting. First skill we have is Arrow Barrage. This will put an AoE of 7 meters down for 10 seconds, and it will tick for 8 seconds of damage after a 2-second delay, which is great. So it deals damage every second, and it keeps your enchant of the weapon and spell damage up more effectively. The next skill we have is where you're going to get your Major Breach, and that is Razor Caltrops. Now this does deal physical damage every second, and it does scale off your highest weapon damage and max stamina. So the higher your weapon damage, the more damage this is going to deal. Now remember what I told you guys about the sets that this build uses. It plays into everything you do. So everything you do, the sets, the bonuses, all that stuff, their effects play into how this build works. The next skill we have is Critical Surge. This is why we have the Thief Mundus Stone. It's you invoke Meridia's name to gain major brutality and major sorcery, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 20% for 33 seconds. While active, dealing critical damage heals you for 336 health. This effect can occur once every 1 second. The spell, the heal from this, is based off your max magicka and spell damage. So it's really good that you get that really high weapon and spell damage the lower you get the enemy's health. Once you have them below 25%, this thing's going to heal you for a lot. Next skill we have is called Boundless Storm. Now, you can use the Hurricane, which is the other morph of lightning form, if you're playing a stamina-based character. But since you're playing a elf, getting the the magic damage really helps. So you manifest yourself as pure lightning, zapping nearby enemies with electricity, dealing 624 shock damage every second for 23 seconds. You also gain your major resolve, increasing spell and physical resist by 6k, and activating this grants you minor or major expedition for 4 seconds, increasing your movement speed by 30%. So remember when I talked about having mobility? This is extra part of that mobility, along with your ability to dodge cheaper. This allows you to move more efficiently. So it allows you to avoid being hit more than it does make you stand in place. You're still going to stand in place. You're going to soak up a lot of damage to your shield. But when you know those big hits are coming, you can use this to run out of the area, or you can use your dodge rolling to get out of the area. Either one. It allows you to be very mobile. Next up, we do have the Bound Aegis again for the Max Magicka and the Minor Resolve, but we also have that ability to activate this set even on the back bar, which makes it good because we can even block with our bow. And then moving on to the last skill, our last ultimate, Aggressive Horn. Now this is actually going to be really good group help. It increases max magic and stamina by 10% for 30 seconds, and you and your allies gain major force, increasing critical damage by 20% for 10 seconds. You're not going to crit a whole lot, but you're going to crit enough to take advantage of this when it's active. And the whole point of the build is to be more aggressive. It's not about being standing there just holding block, being defensive. It's about being more offensive and bringing that greater group damage along with that your tanking capabilities. It's all that in one. So I will go over a little bit of things about the build, why I chose certain sets over others, why things work the way they do with this build, and why I would play it this way after we talk about champion points. So taking a look at the champion points, starting with the green tree, and some of these are optional. So the first one is professional upkeep. A lot of people like to trade this out for things like treasure hunter or other things. You can do that. I like it because I like having the reduced cost of repairs, because after I complete a dungeon, depending on the group I'm with, there might be a couple deaths, including my own, so having cheaper cost reduction helps. But you can also swap it out with the treasure hunter. Am I lost here? No, there we are. But you can trade shit out with treasure hunter when you're doing the dungeon, and so on and so forth. Moving on to the next one, we have Steed's Blessing, increasing your movement speed. We have the Liquid Efficiency, which makes your potions and poisons have a 10% chance not to consume. We have the Rationer, which adds 10 minutes to your food duration per stage, so 30 minutes. Moving on to the blue tree. And in the blue tree, you're pretty much going to want to make sure that you get at least the Precision, the Eldritch Insight, and the Tireless Discipline as passives, and then move down. And through the Staving Death, get the Quick Recovery, Hardy, Elemental Aegis, and Preparation. So you get a lot of damage reduction there, and then extra damage mitigation through Unassailable, which reduces your area effect damage taken, the Enduring Resolve, which reduces your damage taken from damage over time effects, and the Duelist Rebuff, which reduces your single target damage. And then last but not least, Reposit, or Repost, whatever you want to call it. This one, when you block an attack from an enemy within 7 meters, you deal physical damage back to them. This can occur every 5 seconds. And it's going to be really good for you because you're not using a shield. So you won't be blocking non-stop. You're going to be using a shield of absorption to absorb damage more than you are the blocking capability. Alright, moving on to the red tree. And here you pretty much want to get any of the passives pertaining to block, bashing, sprinting, you know, the reduced dodge rolling, the defiance, getting the ability to resurrect allies with 5% more resources per stage can actually help, and things like that. But the ones you're really going to want to focus on is Bastion, which increases the effectiveness of your damage shields against yourself and damage you deal against enemies with damage shields. This is really great, especially in I can't think of the name, but there's a dungeon where you fight a boss with a massive shield, and it's a pain in the butt. She's a serpent lady. Can't stand it, but I love having things like this that allow me to rip through their shields easier. Next up, Rejuvenation. This one, of course, grants you extra health, stamina, magic recovery by 90. This is actually quite helpful. And then next one is Fortified. This increases your resistances. And then last but not least, Boundless Vitality, which increases your health. Now, the reason I can play a build like this so easily is I have a lot of experience with the game, so I know how to play a lot of the dungeons, and I know their mechanics, so playing a build like this is pretty easy for me. If you're new to this build, I would suggest you use a sword and shield on the front bar with a bow on the back, and if you do that, drop the Bound Aegis and use something else, like maybe even the Fighters Guild, Evil Hunter or something. You know, something that's going to give you a greater benefit for getting your crit chance off or whatever. Alright, so a little bit about this build. Fighter magic user in D&D is somebody that pretty much uses, like I said, swordsmanship with magic. In the case of an Eldritch Knight, you are a knight of an order or something, and you tend to use martial combat and magic. So you would wear heavy armor, you would use magic, you would actually have the ability to negate the effects that magic would have against you on heavy armor, and since ESO doesn't have that, it's already there. So you're not affected by any negative reason for using magic. So the gear that I chose for this is really relative to a way a fighter magic user would work. You would use a web spell to hold your enemies in place while your allies and you defeated them. Spawn them a fire. But it doesn't hold them in place, it just deals damage over time in a 4-meter radius. Then you have something like this, which is something that the Eldritch Knight would have, which is anytime they would take damage, they'd have a spell buff on them. Then anytime they're hit, it would redirect damage back to the enemy of some type. It's usually like force damage, or it could be shock damage, or it could be fire damage. It would depend on the spell or the thing like that. But it just really plays into that whole idea of like, I'm a knight of magic, and I'm going to use my magic to my benefit. The same thing with skills. Like, a lot of the skills I'm not using any sword abilities besides the Deadly Cloak. And this would be like I forget the name of it, but there is a spell that Blade Singers in D&D get where they can summon whirling daggers around themselves that they can send out to fight. Like, we'll go out and attack. After a certain amount of time, they'll fire off like 1, 2, 3, 4 every round. And you can do this every round. You can roll to attack with them, and it adds extra damage to you. So the Deadly Cloak kind of plays to that theme. They would also use things like Mage Armor, which is something that would boost their armor class or their resistance, and Bound Aegis kind of plays into that. And then, like, they would have a shield spell, Hardened Armor. They would have something similar to like a Hold Monster spell, Shattering Prison. The taunt would more or less be like an Intimidate, like they're intimidating their enemy. And this is kind of like that. You're intimidating them. They're making them angry, and they're getting enraged. So they're fighting with aggression and not with intelligence. So they're losing their ability to defend, and this increases your damage against them. That same kind of theme there. The rend would be just something that the elf would do, like the fighting would do. You'd be fighting, and then all of a sudden you would just like do like some double swipe and just cut them and make them bleed. It's kind of that element. Like, all these things play into that thematic idea. On the back bar, the arrow barrage. A lot of elves are highly trained in bows. So getting that arrow barrage and hitting multiple targets at once kind of plays into that theme. The razor caltrops. This is something that a lot of fighters in D&D would use as caltrops. They'd throw them out to make the enemies, make it harder for them to get to you, to hold them back in line. And that's kind of what this does, is it slows them down and makes it harder for them to get to your allies, so you can deal more area of effect damage to them. It doesn't affect you because you know where the caltrops are. They don't. Critical surge, not really something. I mean, boosting your weapon and spell damage kind of thing would be like, in D&D terms, there are a few spells you could cast which would give you a greater hit and damage, like enhanced weapon, that kind of thing, and it kind of fits that. And then the same thing with the Boundless Storm. There is a spell that wizards can get besides their mage armor, that it wouldn't make them indestructible, but it would allow them to encase themselves in not a magical armor, but like a bubble that would radiate, like an evil aura, or like necrotic damage and stuff. And this kind of plays off of that, but more in the Elder Scrolls theme. And again, this is Elder Scrolls, so it's taking the idea of something else and putting it into ESO to give players a way to play the game. And I really think that this build, to me, is a great build, because it offers a different nuance to the tanking idea. It allows somebody to be creative and have something that's functional and fun to play. It works because it meets all the requirements necessary to play the content. And that's what makes it so fun, is it's something that's different. It's something that's enjoyable. It's something that can make the game more fun for the person playing it. And even if you choose to use a sword and shield, it's still going to work. But you're going to either be over resistance or whatever. And just to show you what I mean by over resistance, if we go ahead and buff up with our resistance buff, wow, we actually get 30k spell with 30k physical. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the reason I chose the High Elf for this build. High Elves get a lot of really good benefits for this. And with the racial passives, you get spell recharge. When you activate an ability, you restore 625 magicka or stamina, whichever is lowest. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. And when you activate an ability with a channel or cast time, you take 5% less damage. Well, we're not using anything that has a cast time or a channel effect, but the cast time is actually like when you cast the spell. It's instant, so you're not going to have any effect from it. But if you had something that had some kind of timer on it, you would actually take less damage with the effect of it. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But the fact that you're going to get magicka back every 6 seconds whenever you activate an ability really plays into this. The Cerebane Boon, extra max magicka, the Elemental Talent, being able to do get increased weapon and spell damage. It allows the build to be very functional because of the race. When it comes to other skills, like I said, Dark Magic has a lot of great skills that you can use, like Defensive Ruin. Place a protection rune on yourself for 2 minutes while active. The next enemy to attack you is imprisoned in a constricting fear of dark magic, stunning them for a short delay for 3 seconds. You can even use that in PvE. You have things like Dark Deal if you want to get rid of the critical surge. You can use Dark Deal instead. And this sacrifices magicka to give you stamina and health. You can use things like the Daedric Minefield, where you surprise your foes by placing 5 Daedric Mines around them, which take 3 seconds to arm and last 15 seconds, and then when triggered, they explode, dealing magic damage and immobilizing them for 2 seconds. Not the greatest spell, but it still has its functionality. Same thing with Suppression Field. This does an area of effect dome around the enemy, preventing them from casting magic abilities. Enemies within the globe are stunned while enemy players are silenced, and then the globe also damages them for 3,340 magic every second for the 12-second duration. It's a super kind of cheap ultimate. Then you have your Greater Storm Atronach. You also have Storm Calling, the Energy Overload. But even in the Daedric tree, if you wanted to have a pet with you, you could use the Summoned Clanfear. It's a great pet to have out, even when you're tanking, and it can heal you. Then you have things like the Summon Twilight. If you want to be, have some extra healing in your group, you could have this as a support thing. Storm Calling side, you have Mage's Wrath. This is a great execute skill. Not a lot of people use it, but it is a very good execute. Then you have Lightning Flood, which is an area of effect shock damage. If you wanted to play with some other skill that gives you, like, say, the Major Breach, or even if you're just playing an Overland, you could move Arrow Barrage over, grab Poison Injection or Venom Arrow, and you could put Liquid Lightning on the front bar as an area of effect shock damage that goes into play with all your other shock damage. There's a lot of different things you can do. When it comes to the dual wield side, you have Bloodthirsty, you have Blood Craze, you have the Whirling Blades, you also have Shrouded Daggers, which are all like really good damage dealing skills, which you could use up close or at a distance, up close with this. But then you have the bow skills. You have all these different bow skills that you can choose from. When it comes to armor, you are wearing heavy armor. Unstoppable Brute, if you want to drop the Boundless Storm and go with something stamina based, you can go with this, and you can make yourself a little bit more, just like you were before, but you get other immunities and things like that. It does reduce your movement speed, which kind of sucks. Soul Magic, really good Soul Assault, Consuming Trap. Fighters Guild, you have access to all their abilities, along with the Mages Guild if you unlock them. Same thing with Psijic Order and their passives. Undaunted, same thing. Alliance War, you can get the Alliance War skills that will help you out in different situations. Again, it's a matter of how you choose to play the build and what skills and tools you use. If you don't like the sets it uses, pick sets that fit for you better. If you don't like the weapons it uses, pick weapons that work for you better. If you think Ice Staff and the Sword and Shield will work, do it. I'm not going to stop you. The way I choose to play is going to be different from other people. And that's how I'd like to share it with you, is how I would play this build. And how I might actually be playing it, because I actually played around with it and I enjoy this immensely. It's a very good build and it's very fun to play. It offers a lot of uniqueness to it, especially being a sorcerer and heavy armor and all the benefits you can get out of it. It can be a lot of fun. But that's it for the build, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, you guys know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. And if you do subscribe, I do suggest click that notification bell to be notified when I post new videos. I do post new build videos quite often, or try to. I'm getting better at it, so maybe that might help. Other than that, thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.